The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television. Welcome to this episode of Compass, Public Affairs television programming from Pioneer Public TV. We bring you issues that affect our rural areas. I'm Jim Thoreen. Today we examine another topic of common concern in rural America, the status and challenges of our various faith communities. Our aging society, the laws of population affect all aspects of our cities and towns, and a staple of any community, the churches. What will happen when the roster of members declines to a perilous point? Not only in numbers of members, but also the ability to financially survive. We'll discuss and review those and more questions regarding the status of our faith communities. Joining us are two men intensely involved in their respective Christian callings. The Reverend John Anderson is the Bishop of the Southwestern Minnesota Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, or ELCA. The Synod covers a wide portion of Minnesota from St. Cloud to Ortonville to Luverne to St. Peter. Bishop Anderson has served in this capacity since 2003. Tom Caveney is responsible for many duties within the offices of the Roman Catholic Diocese of New Ulm. One of his responsibilities is that of pastoral planning for the diocese. Today, Tom brings greetings from the Most Reverend John Lavoie, Bishop for the diocese, whose schedule would not permit him to be with us. But Tom is here, and we'll continue to learn more. So welcome, gentlemen. Today's topic could easily fill a couple of hours, but we only have 30 minutes, so let's jump in. So perhaps, Bishop, I could start with you. In a broad brush approach, how many of your parishes, the congregations, are simply having to close the doors?
Well, at this time, out of our 240 congregations, we have 3 actively thinking about it. 2 have decided they will close. 1 is actually doing their discernment work. So I think that out of our congregations, we'd have about, I want to just check, we have 50 congregations that are below 30 people at worship week. Now, one of the things about our congregations is they're often nested in parishes. So their ability to sustain themselves at a smaller membership size, that can work. But when a congregation gets to 30 people or less at worship a week, that's a challenging place to be. I actually joined one of these congregations when I was elected bishop. In our tradition, I should not be at the church I was at, and I wanted to join a small membership church. And in that process, I learned how beautiful and deep these communities of faith can be. But yeah, we have quite a number. We have actually 96 congregations that have fewer than 50 people at worship a week.
And similar story for the Roman Catholic Church, Tom?
I think our membership or attendance weekly at our smaller parishes would be in excess of 50. One of our major concerns is the availability of clergy to serve all of our parishes. And it's kind of interesting, I'll just do a little history. So the Diocese of New Ulm was carved out of the Archdiocese in 1958 because of unprecedented population growth after World War II. And at that time, there were 86 parishes that were existing in the Archdiocese that were, if you will, incarnated in this new diocese of 15 counties in southwest Minnesota. And I don't know where people were at in terms of planning at that time, because I think they might have felt growth would continue at an unprecedented rate when really it was at its peak. So since then, 17 of those 86 parishes have either merged or closed. And I'll just give an example. Nassau, not far from here, when it closed, had 23 households, 46 members, and 4 kids under the age of 18. What's really phenomenal is it was a new church built in the 1980s. So we were very fortunate that the little hamlet community of Nassau was able to accept a gift of that church from our diocese, and it's a community center, and our parish records were moved to Ortonville. When a funeral occurs, it might be at Rosen, another very small rural parish in this vicinity, and those folks involved with the funeral might go right back to the community center in Nassau for the funeral, lunch, and the burial. So we have probably 8 or 9 parishes that Bishop LeVoir is asking to look seriously at their future in terms of numbers. We have what we call kind of a parish vitality index, and it identifies especially number of young people and population, sustainability in terms of finances, although I have to be honest, all of our parishes are solvent, and I don't think the people would back away from any necessary commitment to keep their parish open.
Well,
but as elderly move, and there are no longer young folks in our small rural communities, there's a point in time where it really is necessary to say,
well,
where are we
let's
going?
talk about process. Whether, Bishop, maybe we can start with the ELCA. Who raises the red flags? Does it come from the congregation? Does it come from your offices? How does this get initiated? And tough psychologically for any community, any parish, any church. But how does it start? Who starts it?
So in our tradition, it would be a discernment by the local congregation. So this is an area where our ways of doing church together as Christians are different from the Roman Catholic tradition. So normally it'll be I'll hear from a congregational council president or the pastor will say, we want you to know there's a serious conversation happening about closing, and we want help discerning how to do that. So then we usually send in a team of people who've been a part of that. And then that process of discernment can go relatively quickly in a year. Sometimes it's actually multi-years, but the local community of faith in our tradition makes the decision to dissolve is the language we would use, or to be united with a nearby congregation. But that it begins locally.
So, but then in your office, who steps in to guide, facilitate, and help that congregation sort through their options?
So sometimes it's me, but often it's what we call our synod ministers. So they're pastors who are assigned to particular geography, so they know the congregations, they know the leaders, and then they go in. And what we're doing lately is we've asked a pastor and a layperson who have been involved with congregations in this moment to become shepherds, and we're currently training them to be able to carry more of that weight. Because what we've seen is I could come in and talk about all this, but when people really are able to hear and where it really gets deeper is when we have a layperson who's actually gone through the experience and a pastor who's gone through the experience. Those folks are able to talk in a way that actually is most helpful. So we'll often pay to have a pastor who's executed a closing well, and a layperson that we're aware of from another church come to share their stories, and then that helps the congregation starts to think about its story.
The feeling that we're not alone in this, and it has happened elsewhere as well. Same or like process, Tom, in the New Ulm Diocese?
In advance of our discussion today, I shared our diocese guidelines for merging and closing parishes. And so there's an identified process. Part of it's based on, in the Catholic Communion, canon law dictates that our bishop is our shepherd, and that he empowers pastors to lead our parishes. Each parish is a civil corporation that involves 2 lay persons from that community as trustees, the bishop, our vicar general, and the pastor. So in those contexts, that leadership group would discern whether or not a parish might need to look at merging or closing. It's very difficult to close a parish, both in terms of what do you do with these beautiful and most of the time well-preserved church properties. And so in our communion we are merging, and that means that we're not able to have a weekend mass, but that we have a weekday mass or a weekday service, that some other activities are going to continue to occur in the parish, certainly funerals, weddings, although in some of the most rural parishes that we're looking at merging, we might only have one wedding a year or two. And our faith communities have been working for over 20 years to form what we call area faith communities that involve 3 to 5 parishes. They share a pastor and or an associate ordained, oftentimes a full-time parish ministry resource. We share religious education directors with 3 or 4 parishes with a common curriculum enabling the volunteer religious ed people in each of those parishes to facilitate what's done with the kids in those small rural parishes.
The psychological challenges that you experience in these small parishes, churches, has got to be phenomenally difficult to deal with. If you have been a member of a Catholic church in your town for decades, or you've been a member of your local Lutheran church for decades, and things are changing, and of course the old basic rule, change equals resistance, and yet change is inevitable. So psychologically, when you deal with those congregations, those people who are deeply devoted to their community, their church, how do you come in to soften the blow, if you will? That's a trite phrase perhaps, but it maybe makes sense. How do we do that?
Well, what I explained, where we have learned that actually bringing in somebody who's actually been involved really helps people think about it. And then we try to set up the journey as a discernment journey instead of, in our case, that they might take time to figure it out. So a congregation that decided 2 weeks ago, Faith and Avoca, that they'd like to move towards closing, they've actually been talking about this for about 3 years. They've been doing informal conversations and formal meetings. So, but one of the things we've learned is both of those need to happen. When I first started, I think I was aware of the formal work, but actually the informal conversation with people has helped. And the congregations that actually have their leaders engage folks who aren't at worship every week, that also helps those folks feel like they're a part of what's happening, because sometimes we'll come to a decision, and then folks who haven't been so engaged, they disagree and they grieve, and then we have more of a painful journey. But in this case at Faith, we've had a strong lay leader who's just kept leading conversations, and that's been helpful. But that's how it looks in that case.
In Tom, a similar psychological feeling in the diocese?
Bishop LeVoir has been very deliberate and consultative with the parishioners. So if there's any thought of a parish identified as a candidate for merging, he tries to meet with those parishioners a year or 2, maybe even 3 in advance, and then sets the stage, if you will, for those people to be in dialogue with their pastor as to, first of all, where might they be going. And in some of our rural parishes, it isn't a matter of, well, if we merge a parish such as Green Isle with the area of faith community in our diocese that includes Arlington and Gaylord, that doesn't mean that some people east of Green Isle aren't going to go to Norwood Young America or to another one of our small rural parishes, St. John's Assumption in Faxon Township. So it's a matter of discerning where will the people go, because we obviously want to see our Catholic faithful remaining active in a parish and in a faith community. So respectful of that, and then recognizing that from a, just an administrative perspective, there still needs to be a place where sacramental records of 100 years baptismal certificates, confirmation records, marriage certificates, cemetery records, etc. Where will they be maintained?
Right.
We never dissolve our parishes civil corporations because they may be named in a will. God forbid they may be named in litigation. And the cemeteries are also not separate corporations, but entities within the parish financial structure that require a certain amount be maintained for their perpetual care.
So administratively, it may be relatively simple to get to a conclusion over a year or 2 year time. We need to close our doors. Administratively behind it, you people have got tremendous jobs to follow up for years.
Yeah, and I think in the Roman Catholic community's case, the diocese is more involved in that. In our case, we would be more in a supporting position, making sure the documents are archived, making sure that they have a plan about how to take care of their cemetery if they have one, the building, what would they do with the building, and then we would share this passion that we would help the community find places to worship God and continue to be a part of the Christian movement.
Right.
So.
You know, there are some parallels, I think, between closure of schools and closure of some parishes or churches. Because I've heard for all these decades, if our school goes, so goes the town. Now we can hear ripples of if our church goes, so goes the town. So it's a broader picture than just your congregations. It's to the community itself. Do you get engaged with local officials in talking about the impact on community of a closure of a church or a parish? Or does that simply stay within the realm of your responsibilities as religious leaders?
I'll respond by saying oftentimes our parish leaders are also community leaders. Yeah. So certainly in a community such as Beardsley, where we've recently worked with them as they've merged with Graceville, although they still have a lot of active activities at St. Mary's in Beardsley. The community leaders are very much involved with what will happen with our rectory, what will happen with our church, how can it be used beyond church for the community. I illustrated Nassau. Right. That was actually gifted, if you will, to the community. We closed a parish, St. Patrick's in Candy, Ojai, and a community group assumed that building. Another church that was built, ironically, only in the 1980s, not anticipating smaller families, rural decline, young people leaving. So I think that oftentimes our community leaders are synonymous with our parish leaders, and therefore they would be immediately involved in brainstorming with the community about what is our Catholic Church going to look like, be it a resource to the community or to be continuing with some weekday services, masses, and other activities, religious ed.
You know, one of the aspects of a community loss of school, loss of church, is that of who do we find to become the leaders in those two areas? And then how do we find younger people? I mean, we have a lot of aged population. We know that from the demography of our area. How do we find people to get engaged as younger members of your congregation? How do we bring them in the door for, even if it's a closed but now transferred 10 miles down the road, how do we get the young people involved?
Well, I don't think I ever visit a congregation and have a conversation with them where the question of how do we get our younger members involved, it always surfaces, right? It always comes up. But I think one of the things that I see that's encouraging is that actually while many of our very young adults leave our area, people who are like 30, 35 actually are coming back into some areas. And I'm always kind of surprised when I visit a church because I might think it'll be mostly older folks, and I get there and there's all kinds of young families. So sometimes they find each other, and then I think we have to make an argument for rural Minnesota and talk about the quality of life we have here. We need to talk about the beauty of that. And I think part of what the returning 30-year-olds are about is they remember the beauty of small-town, rural context, and they come back. But the issue of forming leaders for the whole community, that's a big deal. But I think if Tom and I were to talk about our congregations, actually the issue of finding and identifying to developing the gifts of lay people and people to serve as rostered ministers, this is maybe a bigger challenge than the issue of the congregations and they're staying open or closed, because your tradition is experiencing you use acute, I think was the language you used. I would say we're experiencing a tightening of supply for pastors. And so the way that I would have operated as a bishop in my first couple of years and how we approach candidates and helping congregations find new candidates, that's really changed. But this issue of, I think, young adults, the thing I want to close with is some of our congregations are figuring out how to let the older generations receive the gifts of the younger generations. And that's a delicate dance, because we live in a time where there are more generations in church than there have ever been, because we've been able to live longer. And that creates, I think, more of a challenge of the kind of transition of responsibility and role of all of the baptized in the church.
Similar story in the New Ulm Diocese?
Well, there's volumes being written and studied about how do we engage the millenniums in giving, in participation, and once they're involved, they will bring others. I was with a group of parish leadership last night, about 20 folks from Comfrey and Leavenworth, and you would identify those two very remote rural parishes as pretty aged. But the case was that there were new leaders in each of those parish councils quite concerned about, we want to engage the youth choir. We want to engage the youth choir, and they're actually attracting some youth choir participants from other parishes just because of the nature of that. And our youth ministry efforts are, I think, diocesan-wide, trying to focus on people preparing not just for ordained ministry as Catholic priests or consecrated religious women, but also engaging people to look at a degree in parish ministry, look at a degree in religious ed or Catholic education, and come back to parishes to work in those capacities as well. We need those people present in those parishes in order to attract and maintain the participation of the younger folks.
One of the phenomenons is, and I think you mentioned it, Bishop, about people who are coming back home after they've been to their 30s or late 30s and returning to home, because now, for many jobs, you can live in Wood Lake, or you can live in Bellevue, or you can live in Laverne, and connect by internet to your principal workplace, and maybe go to Sioux Falls or Minneapolis once a week. A different dynamic than 40 years ago.
Yeah, even as we do church business, we've over the last 2 years moved to hybrid meetings almost all the time. With some of our people are on Zoom, so if they can't get to us in the flesh, they're on the video conference. And it's really interesting. You can get a lot of stuff done when there's a blizzard that wouldn't have happened otherwise, right?
Unfortunately, this spring we may have far too many blizzards, but that's this year. That's not permanent, I don't think.
I couldn't believe when I left last night, there was still discussion about whether or not this week's marriage preparation in Olivia is going to be influenced by another snowstorm. I thought, no, this isn't. I'm not hearing this. Last
the end of April.
2 weeks ago was bad enough canceling a meeting on April Fool's Day. I would also like to just interject and kind of parallel what Bishop Anderson shared, that there is technology and there's no limit to what we can do as a larger diocesan or synodical entity to connect our people, whether it's all the religious ed directors or all of that. But faith will still be expressed in worship in the flesh. And it's very, very hard to assume that, you know, there are a lot of people, believe it or not, who are shut in or whatever, who watch the national Catholic station EWTN, and they go to Mass every day. on that station. And I'm a distributor of communion to the hospital in New Ulm, and there's a network of people in our parishes that bring communion to the people who are homebound, and they are very much involved with EWTN. But we're not, as a community or as a diocese, looking at that as a way to normally conduct church. You know, we're not going to have Skype Mass.
For better or for
Yeah.
worse, we're in this information age with all the blessings and all the challenges that come with it. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. As I said at the outset, we need 2 hours, but we can't do that today. Maybe on a return trip we can do that. Our thanks to Bishop John Anderson for his views as leader of the ELCA in Southwest Minnesota, and to Tom Caveney, Pastoral Planning Director for the New Ulm Diocese of the Catholic Church. You may go to the websites for each of these organizations for more information. And thank you for joining us on Compass. We are here each week to inform, to educate, and to highlight issues of the day. Join us next time on Compass, and thank you for viewing Pioneer Public Television. Do you have an idea for Compass? Send your suggestions and comments to yourtv@pioneer.org.